My name is Michael Peterman, and I'm going to be moderating today on behalf of the Disabled Veterans National Foundation. A quick note for those of you who are unfamiliar, in 2011, we provided veteran services organizations with over $8.5 million in goods, and to date, we've helped just over 80,000 veterans, and that number is growing daily. We are fortunate today to have some folks joining us whose experience puts them in a very unique position to provide some incredibly useful information for our participants. The first of which is Ted Daywalt, who is the CEO of VetJobs. This is a leading website for veterans seeking employment. Mr. Daywalt, if you would, please share a little bit about yourself with our audience.
Thank you very much. I'm glad we're here. I hope everybody will have a good day today with the things that we have to present. I'm a retired Navy captain. I did 7 years active, 21 in the reserve. When I got out, off active duty back in '78, I went back and got a second master's degree, which was an MBA from Emory. I've been CEO, president of various companies in the chemical, steel, biomedical waste, and I've been working in the recruiting and space since about 1994.
Excellent. Thank you. Equally impressive and also joining us today is Mr. Jeff Clare. Jeff is the founder and CEO of Higher Disability Solutions. Jeff has spent over 20 years in HR lead roles and has interviewed thousands of people in his career. Jeff, if you could, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. I started my career in human resources with a company that probably most of the younger people never heard of, called Zenith Television, and went on to head up human resources for RCA, appointed by President Clinton to the Commission on the Employment of People with Disabilities, and started Be a Hero, Hire a Hero, working with wounded warriors right after 9/11. And we've been extremely successful in finding career opportunities. We've placed over 2,000 individuals in jobs over the last several years. And we look forward to assisting today and trying to teach people the science of interviewing. So I look forward to participating today.
Thank you, sir. If you guys could also mute for a moment. Diane Hudson Burns is last and clearly not least. She is respected as one of the industry's leading career coaches and specializes in well, a handful of things, but composing quality career change, military transition, and federal resumes. She's a nationally published author and is expert in the career builder section of multiple national newspapers. Diane, if you could do the same and tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I am a career management coach, and I started my career as an HR specialist and employment specialist at Northrop Corporation in Los Angeles way back when. I'm also a former special agent investigator for the Department of Defense, so that was my first federal position, and in that position I was not only trained to be an interviewer but a little bit of an interrogator, so I'm pretty good at drawing that information out of people. I also have my own company, Career Marketing Techniques, where I actually write resumes for people that are looking for federal positions, and I just happen to specialize in military transitions, mostly because I worked overseas for 12 years and then in the DC corridor, and then literally have moved around the world a few times. So I work with a lot of military personnel, and then I also work with a lot of people who are looking for federal jobs. So I'm very excited to be here today to talk to everybody about that federal interview.
Thank you, ma'am. So suffice it to say, we really couldn't ask for a better group of speakers. Our agenda today, Ted's going to give us some tips, Jeff is going to advise on some pitfalls to avoid, and Diane's going to get into some behavioral specifics that make a difference in the eyes of employers. Finally, at the end, we are going to have time for questions and answers. This is really important. I'd like to make sure that the webinar, you can post questions in the chat box located at the bottom of your screen. Submit those questions. I very much encourage you to do so. We want this to be as informative as possible. This forum is purely for you, So if you have questions, we want to make sure they're answered. More than likely, if you have a question, there's going to be other folks on the webinar who have that same question. We don't get to them immediately. In the interest of time, we will do our best to cover all the questions at the end of the webinar. Lastly, we're going to be posting the key learnings of this presentation as well as the presentation itself under the Veterans Programs tab on the website, www.dvnf.org, so you can access it if needed. Also, upon request, we will email you a copy of the full presentation. If you'd like to receive this, simply reply to the email you will receive following the presentation. I hope that this webinar serves as one more thing to underscore our commitment to help this nation, to help our nation's veterans, and we recognize you guys and note that by participating today, you're taking a personal responsibility to improve your skill set and find that next great career opportunity. We are very happy to be able to provide some guidance and tips. I sincerely hope you find it useful and educational. This is part 3 of a 4-part series, each with a different core topic, all designed to help veterans find the jobs that you deserve. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Daywalt for part 1. Take it away, sir.
Thank you, and thank you all for attending our webinar today. VetJobs has been around for 13 years. We're the Veteran of Foreign Wars sponsored Internet Job Board. We get a little over 200,000 people a month going through the site. We got over 42,000 jobs up today. But for those of you that are looking for a job, in our employment assistance section, you'll find many articles that will reinforce what I'm going to be talking about, Diane and Jeff, about what you need to be doing to find a job. What he said earlier is absolutely true. It's up to you to take responsibility for finding your own job and going through the process. Other people can't do this for you. So let's talk real briefly about one of the things that hurts a lot of people when they got their resume accepted, they've been brought in for an interview, and they hit with something called a BI, behavioral interviewing. Behavioral interviewing has been around for about 20 years, but while SHRM and Saudi Human Resource Management and others have been teaching the HR people how to give a behavioral interview, there haven't been that many organizations teaching the candidates how to pass a behavioral interview. It takes 6 months to a year for an interviewer to become very proficient at conducting a BI. And behavioral interviewing is based on the concept that there are about 40 base behaviors in every job, but you use more of one behavior than you do another. For example, if I was going to be going into sales or into management, my communication skills would be very important, but my scientific and technical skills may not be as so important. So what they do when they're doing a behavioral interview is they look at the top 5 to 8 behaviors, and then each person you're going to interview within the company will be emphasizing those behaviors. You will find that they'll be taking copious amounts of notes when they're talking to you. And the reason for the notes and for this whole approach is primarily legal. Due to so many people in our country wanting to be so litigious, the only interviewing process left that is defensible in a labor court of law is behavioral interviewing. Let's say Diane came and applied to VetJobs and I didn't hire her, and so she turns around and sues claiming that, well, you didn't hire me because you think I'm too old or because I'm a woman or whatever the case may be. If I show up in that labor court of law and was not using behavioral interviewing, the judge will automatically assume that we're at fault. So it has become very important to know how to pass a behavioral interview. These are the main reasons why people make use of the BI. It is definitely more objective. It identifies better matches. It has also been found to be much more predictive because it is based on your past behavior, which is a good indication of what your future behavior will be like. Let me try and move down to this next slide now. Like I said, it's based on the 40 specific behaviors, and your answers, when you give it, have to be in a defined format. Now, you go back to the early books that were written about BI, they use SAR, S-A-R, that's situation, the action taken, and the results. And of course, many consultants have now come along, and some have STAR, some have SPAR. It's all the same box, just a different wrapping. But let's talk about these three things. The S stands for the situation. So when they ask you a question, you've got about 90 seconds to give what the situation was in response to their question, those actions that you took, and then the results from those actions. And actually, that's a good format to follow for any type of interviewing. When you are preparing for a BI, one of the best things you can do is make sure that you know all of your background real well. And you can and when you look at the job that you're applying to, you can kind of figure out, okay, these are the top 15, 20 skill sets they're going to be looking at. Be sure to pull up examples in your background that you can use to back up what you will be saying. You need to be absolutely specific in knowing what it is you're going to say, from the standpoint that when they start hitting you with probing questions, if you're trying to make things up, it'll pop up real good. Now, this is a question that I've used many times in the past. Let's say I want to have someone out there on their own. I want to make sure they're dependable. We can count on them. They have initiative. They can think outside the box type thing. So I say, okay, you work for this company, you know, lots of rules, blah, blah, blah. You're in the military. The military has lots of rules that you have to follow. It's a large organization, but frequently those rules get in the way. Give me an example on your ship or in your battalion, wherever, where you had to break the rules to get something done. If you say, well, I've never broken the rules, what you just told the interviewer is that you haven't really done anything. So, but you don't want to give an example like I had with one kid in an interview when I asked him this question. He said, oh, we had a problem with a boss and he was giving everybody a bad time, but we fixed him, we put sugar in his gas tank. And I was thinking, what? Do you want to come work for us here? What they'd be looking for is an example such as, well, my boss was gone on vacation one time. We had these consultants in here working. It was a big project, and the consultants came in and said they had to have this particular software package. It was about $11,000. I didn't have the authority to sign for $11,000, but if we didn't get it in and start using it right away, we were going to fall months behind in the process. So I went ahead and approved it. When my boss got back, he was a little upset, but he understood why he did it. Something like that is the way you would want to answer the question. And needless to say, no negatives at all. You never want to get into negatives. Now, when you start answering questions in a BI, you will find that people will start interrupting you, asking you, well, what did you think about what you did there? Or what do you think your coworkers thought of? Or what made you think you could do that? And they will be interrupting you a lot. Get used to the interruptions and understand that once you've answered that question, go back to your main train of thought. The probing questions are there quite intentionally to try and shake you up. And it generally happens when you're interviewing between 3 or 4 people, and one will be following your main answers and the others will be hitting you with probing questions. The most common mistakes in BI is talking too much. If you're going much over 90 seconds to 2 minutes in an answer, you're going too long. So practice on keeping an answer short. Do not make up any answers. You will be discovered. Here are some great references if you want to go learn some more about behavioral interviewing. The way things are today, you will run into a BI. It is becoming more the norm. And so if you're prepared, you can go in and do well. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, sir. Next, well, you know what? If you guys have any questions on that particular set of slides, please do submit them. As Jeff, if you would, let's have you go next and hit on the pitfalls. Jeff, are you there?
Yeah, I'm just getting to the slide.
Excellent. Thank you, sir.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. And in my career, I've interviewed well over 10,000 people. And I always get the answer of why a person doesn't get the job. And normally, I don't get the answer of why someone did get the job. Interviewing is a science. You don't get a second chance at a first impression. So you've heard a little bit about, do's and don'ts, and I'm sure everybody knows that they've heard the resume is the key to getting in the door, and it absolutely is. So the first thing we'll do is we will review the resume and look for spelling mistakes, grammatical errors, so everybody pretty much knows that they've got to be on point when it comes to their resume. And when I was in college, my professor taught me that an interview is nothing more than two people lying to each other. And it's pretty funny stuff. But in interviewing over 10,000 people, never once did anyone say to me, I'm not the right person for the job. So, and I've never heard a candidate say to me that they interviewed for a company where the recruiter said, we're not the right company for you. So, when you prepare yourself for an interview, you need to be prepared. You're competing against others in a very competitive job market, so you need to rise to the top. So when I say be prepared, you got to do your homework. And I've had people interview for jobs with companies that might be called, Joe and Joe Corporation, and they might be a plumbing concern, and the person being interviewed said, I'm really glad to come work for a construction company. You got to know your employer. Before you sit down in that interviewing seat, make mental notes of the room. Maybe the person was in the service and there's a picture of him in a naval uniform or an army uniform. Make note. Are there picture of children? What's the colors of the room? All of these things play a part into an interview being something that's somewhat subjective. People tend to hire people that are mirror images of themselves. And so if I'm interviewing somebody and they said they were a graduate of Emporia State College in Kansas, of which I went to, that person would have a better shot in getting through the barrier. So look around, make some notes, think about how you're going to integrate what you've seen into your interview responses. Look the part. I got a couple of calls last week from employers saying that the people that they were interviewing and interviewing for higher level jobs, their tie didn't match the suit. And so as simple as that might sound, remember, a person makes a first impression, and if I interview a person and I hate the color green and they're wearing a green tie, that's what I remember. So make sure that what you're doing and what you're wearing are all pretty muted and pretty basic. So, don't go in there with a flowered shirt or a flowered tie. Please make sure that everything you're doing is based on the other person's response to what you're doing. Manners matter. And so, again, I had a young man right outside Fort Gordon interview for a job, and 5 years in the Army, he was programmed to say, yes, sir, no, sir. He didn't get the job, and the response was he didn't have a personality. And so we overturned that decision into him getting the job, because what we have to do is remember that we are now going into the public sector where the answers have to be somewhat more descriptive. All recruiters ask questions. You need to have questions ready for the recruiter. you have to have done your homework and then formulate the questions in your mind that you think the recruiter is going to be able to answer and going to be very candid with you. And when I say questions, it might be, can you please elaborate on the skills that are required for that position? But we've had many candidates in an interview ask the first question, when's my first vacation? So do your homework, research the company, and think about questions that'll be automatically a decision of no, we're not interested in hiring you. Follow-up. A thank you letter is always appreciated. You know, at the end of the day, you're two people in a room, and a person might go through interviewing many people for the same job. And again, I was taught that if you're interviewing 100 people, your job is not to hire one, it's to eliminate 99. So rising to the top would be a very complete thank you letter. Looking forward to hearing from you again. Remember, companies are in the business of making money. In your interview, you need to be able to explain how your role in the company would lead them to be a benefit of your experience in that company. Many of us, although we say one thing, we look a different way. And so nonverbal communications will eliminate you from consideration. And so remember that when you're sitting there and a question is asked of you, a frown, a smile, looking away, those are all things that are used to judge whether or not there's serious interest on your part. Be honest. Make sure everything on your resume is true. Every statement you make is true, and you won't have issues that'll come back to haunt you years later. And something that we've really found to be of much hindrance in an interview process of more recently than a while ago is make sure your Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn accounts do not have any negative or derogatory statements or pictures. Make sure that when your friends submit something on one of those communication tools, they're not calling you names, you're not describing someone in a negative connotation, even your nicknames. Companies now look at Facebook, they look at other ways to make sure that you're the right person for the job. So let's make sure that everything we do is on target, because interviewing is a science, it's an art form, and I think everybody that's listening today would be very happy to get every job and be able to turn them down because you're accepting something else as opposed to keep getting that rejection. So I wish everybody luck, and if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you, Jeff. Miss Diane, you have the controls.
All right, thank you. I'm going to move back up the slides here and see if I can find the right one. There we go, federal interviewing. All right, well, like I said earlier, I'm very glad to be here today to speak to all of you and have the opportunity to tell you a little bit about federal interviewing. Some of the components of the federal interview are very similar to the components of an interview in corporate America, and some are very different. And so that's what we're going to talk about here. Federal interviews are typically structured interviews. They are behavior-based structured interviews, and they are scored against very specific benchmarks. And we're going to talk about some of those benchmarks in a minute so that you can see what those are. I'm going to move to the next slide there. A structured interview is that all candidates are asked the same questions in the same order. Like Ted was talking about a little bit ago, that the behavior-based interview is prevents the companies from being sued because they can say, we asked everybody the same set of behavior-based questions. And this very often comes from companies or federal agencies working with the unions, and the unions say, we want to make sure that it's fair for everybody. So your structured interview very often will be the same set of questions in the same order for everybody. They're all going to be evaluated on the same rating scale. And if you're interested at all in going to the next level and learning and understanding how the Office of Personnel Management scores you, I have a website link there for you that you can go to. You can pretty much take a look at anything on the Office of Personnel Management website, and it will give you how they're going to score you, how they're going to grade your resume for a federal interview, to prepare, to qualify you to that level. Anything that you might need to know, you can pretty much find out on the Office of Personnel Management website. You can also go to usajobs.gov, and this is the federal government's main website where they post all of their applications, where you will post your resume, and where you can track your resume. It will even say if your resume has been scored highly enough and referred to the hiring official, which would put you in line potentially for an interview. In order to be scored for these interviews, the interviewers have to be in agreement on acceptable answers as you move through this process. There's a couple different types of federal interviews that interviewers engage in. Typically, there's the telephone interview. There's the Skype interview or some type of video conferencing. There's the in-person interview, which would be typically one-on-one, or you might move from one person to another person. There's a panel interview where you might have multiple people in the interview room with you. And then there's the assessment interview, which basically means after you're finished with the interview, they may actually have you write an essay, or in some cases they'll bring in a group of 10 or 20 people all together for a group interview, and they'll have you work as a team and have you go through what they call assessments. In some cases, they want you to provide transcripts, or they might want you to provide writing samples, and all of these would be part of the assessment. I love the little cartoon there, applying for a job at IKEA. Come on in, make a chair, and take a seat. This is a situational interview. So can this person who wants to apply for a company who's all about putting furniture together, can they accomplish this and sit in the chair? So I like that. The telephone interview is pretty common at this point in time because not as many agencies are flying people to the interview location. This is really kind of an advantage for you because you can have your resume on the desk, you can have the posting that you applied for on your table, and any information that you pulled down off of the website regarding that agency. Now, of course, you don't want to be reading it sounding like you're reading it out of a book or off that piece of paper, but you have the opportunity to mark some notes and review some things while you're in that interview. The disadvantage is you cannot see their reactions to how you're responding. You want to stand up in a telephone interview and you want to put on a bright smile even though they can't see you, because that comes across in how you sound. Now, the Skype interview can be a little bit more intimidating because you're going to be on a video camera. It could be delayed slightly in the viewing and the hearing, and then you're going to see that group of people behind. You're going to have to put on your suit, your tie, or your skirt suit, whatever it's going to be, as if you were going into the interview. The in-person interview is just that. You want to make sure that you're on time. You want to be there 10 minutes in advance. You want to be in touch with the point of contact, the HR specialist who's told you when and where this interview is going to be. In that case, you might meet with one person. They might have you meet with more than one person, one after the other, or you might sit in a room with a panel. I've had clients who've been in panel interviews with up to 17 people interviewing them at the same time. That can be a little intimidating when you are suddenly in the hot seat. So you always want to start your response with the person who asks it, with eye contact, move around that panel with eye contact, finish with the person that asked the question, and then start with the next response as you move through. So that can be a little bit intimidating. And then, like I said, there's the assessment interview. Sometimes they will let you know in advance whether or not you're going to have an additional assessment before or after during that interview process. So just be aware of those types of things that might be happening. You're going to be responding in the behavior-based responses, just like Ted was describing. You're going to be typically asked a set of questions within a certain time frame that's very structured. So it's either 30 minutes. I had a client just do a 30-minute interview a week ago Tuesday. A 60-minute interview, had a client conduct a 60-minute interview last week, and then 90 minutes. I don't see the 90 minutes as often, but most definitely they're out there. So when they say to you, we are going to ask you 10 questions, and it's a 60-minute interview, you know that you have about 4.5 minutes per question to respond. The reason for that is because you're going to want to have time in the end to have some follow-up. They might ask a probing question, or you might want to ask them a question, which certainly is not going to be, what kind of dental and medical benefits do you have for me, or when are my vacation days going to start? You're going to want to ask a question that says, how can I be successful on the job when I begin this position? Or you want to ask a question that has something to do with what you were discussing in that interview. Now, the responses are going to be scored on these behavior-based questions and your answers, and then some additional probing questions. So they might actually say to you, well, tell me a little bit more about that, or what were the results of that? But please remember, if you're in a structured interview and it's set for 60 minutes, they might not ask any probing questions because you might be getting close to the time in the end. So you're going to have to practice enough so that you know how long it's going to take you to answer those questions. Now, behavior-based responses need to be delivered in the CCAR format, which is the same SAR that Ted was talking about. The Office of Personnel Management uses what they call CCAR. Challenge, context, actions, and results model. And that's what they're going to be scoring you on in the interview process. So let's take a look at the CCAR model for just a second. You want to describe the specific problem. You want to describe the people and the groups that you were working with. What was your job title at the time? What was the culture that you were involved in? You want to tell them about the actions that you had to take. And then you want to obviously give them a really good, strong result. You want to qualify it and you want to quantify it. A lot of times people will answer questions and they will say, this is what I was doing and this is what I did. But they forget the results. They forget those big accomplishments and the results in the end. So you want to definitely make sure that you follow that. They are scoring you on this model, on this format. So think about it like this. Here's the achievement or the project. When I'm telling about it, I'm going to say in 2007 to 2009, when I was this job title, working for this company on this project. These were the things that were challenging about it. I had to do 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then you get back to those results. So that's how you're going to respond to those questions. And on this next slide here, I have an example of a story that follows this format. As an operations manager for a multi-line insurance company, generated sales in excess of $10,000 a week, manage, oversee customer service, policy, etc. And this person had $6 million in annual premiums. Challenge, he had to grow the company. The team was not trained, and he was working with people that didn't know what they were doing, and there was no capital to start. The actions, what did he do? Design new work methods, structures, training, mentoring, and administrative procedures. And what was the result? Developed a profitable agency and a cohesive team of professionals from 0 to 750 in 2 years. Great example. Now, the scoring is based on identifying the problems, determining the accuracy and the relevance of the information, and then using a judgment to generate and evaluate alternatives and to make recommendations. So here's an example from the Office of Personnel Management of how they will score somebody at the highest level for an HR professional. And you can see the responses there. They have to apply competency in very difficult situations, analyzing complex labor management disagreements, resolve logistical problems with hiring, and projected shortages. And then your response would want to have a great result. I want to also give you an example of how you need to be aware of translating what you're saying from military speak to corporate speak or federal speak in the interview. This is from an actual resume and from an actual military client that I worked with a while ago. Supported the 76th Aircraft Wing, providing services to 12 air carrier wing squadrons and 32 reserve squadrons, supported commands on a special project unit, managed inventory and a budget. And that's great, it sounds great. And when you're in the military, you can say that and everybody around you will understand. In that federal resume, particularly when you're in that federal interview, and if the people are not DOD and they're not military, they will not understand what a 76th aircraft wing means, or what a 12 carrier air wing squadron means, etc. So after I worked with my client for a while, this is what we developed. Supervised a staff of 35, providing services to 12 customers, major customers, and 32 tenant units, encompassing 87 worldwide sites. And then as you can see here, we go on logistical support and requirements with a bench stock of 2,400 items and a $30 million operational budget. This person, after I worked with him, went into interviews and stated that he was capable of this, and he was successful in obtaining a job. Some of your sample interview questions might include, what do you consider to be this organization's top 3 challenges? You have to do your homework. You have to know what the organization is all about. What do you consider to be as your most important interpersonal skill? And then describe a time when you used your interpersonal skill to manage a sensitive situation. That's that behavior-based question. When you hear those words, describe a time as, or what is your greatest strength and why, that's a behavior-based question. You do not want to answer it with, well, if I was going to use one of my interpersonal skills as a manager or as a team leader, I would. You want to say, one of my greatest interpersonal skills is communications, and let me give you an example why. One of the other things that you might want to remember when you're working with preparing for the federal resume, very often, and this is true for federal, this is true for industry, one of the first questions they're going to ask you is, tell me about yourself. This is to break the ice. And you want to be able to tell them about yourself from a professional point of view and not from your childhood on up. So very often I'll get responses from people that say, well, when I was in high school and I was on the football squad, and go from there. I was working with a client one time who was a geologist, and I asked him, tell me about yourself. And he said, well, I loved to dig for rocks when I was a kid. And I said, wait a minute, you flew over Ground Zero on 9/11 with presidential clearance to check the fires and how deep they were in the earth, and that's pretty important, and you're going to start off with digging rocks. So we worked on that for a while, and he said, well, maybe you're right. But think about this. This is an overview for you. My name is, here's me. My name is Diane. I'm an experienced career management coach with 20 years of experience in the careers industry, expertise in federal resumes and military transitions. My strengths include career coaching and training. I've been recognized as an award-winning resume writer and career coach, as well as a book author for federal resumes. My personal style is that I'm honest and I'm forthright as a career coach, and I'm interested in utilizing my skills and experience as a career coach and trainer for your organization. So that gives you a quick idea of how you can do that in 30 seconds or less. For the overall interview preparation, you want to learn about the organization. go to the agency's website after you have reviewed your USA Jobs announcement that was the position you got the interview from. Look at the agency's site, look at the press room, look at the media room, find out everything you can about that organization. Practice developing your CCAR responses to questions based on the KSAs, knowledge, skills, and abilities, the major duties, and the self-assessment questions from the federal job vacancy announcement. And what I did here is I gave you an example of what some of those self-assessment questions might look like on a federal announcement. Skills in written communications, oral communications, facility management, and construction practices. And this was for a program manager. Now, you don't want to do your responses like, I'm excellent in oral and written communications, but rather what you want to do is take a look at this list here and say, wow, written communications to develop documents and reports. So you would give an example that says, yes, I have developed written communications. Specifically, I wrote reports for and documents for that were read by these types of audiences that resulted in this, a facility development, a facility change, a reorganization to the organization, something like that. So it's very important. Finally, I want to talk about dressing for success for just a moment because, as Jeff stated, you cannot remake that first impression. Please don't wear any military uniforms or military clothing to the interview process. Please sit in your chair and sit back and be at ease, if you will, because I do have some clients who sit on the edge of the chair, or I have some who've even had difficulty because they want to stand at attention. You need to sit in the chair and relax during that interview process. Go out and get a suit or get appropriate clothing if you're applying for a logistics position. It might be that a khaki pants and a polo shirt is appropriate. If you're applying for a management position someplace, a tie and a coat is appropriate. So, all right, well, thank you very much. I appreciate everybody's attention today. We're looking forward to some questions and Q&A here, and we will certainly be willing to facilitate that. And it was a great opportunity to be here today. Thank you.
Well, either one of two things has happened. Either you guys did such a good job explaining all of this that there weren't any questions, or we may be experiencing a technical difficulty with the chat sessions or not coming through. So I don't think I can answer that question, but to those who are on the call, if you do have questions, we are going to send you a thank you at the end of this session. You're going to get an email. I would very much like for you, if you would, please reply with questions, and we will post those questions and answers back to all who respond so that you can see that feedback. And we may even post those questions on the site with the overview or with the presentation itself.
Michael, we do have a
for some reason this isn't. Oh, we do.
Yeah, I see some.
We do have a.
I don't see him.
Okay. We have one question here, and he's saying, I keep having recruiters ask about credit checks. He had recently walked away from an upside-down house that was bad for his credit, but not a true reflection of who he was as an employee or manager. How would I explain this to the recruiter? And Diane or Jeff, if either of you would like to take that question.
This is Diane. I'll respond to that. As a former special agent investigator, that's what I did, was review people for the purposes of clearances. I'm not an adjudicator, so it cannot be exact as to what I'm saying. However, you have to be honest. That's the bottom line. You just need to tell them that, unfortunately, due to the economy right now, you're going to see when you run my credit check that my house was upside down and I had either a foreclosure or a short sale, and you will let them know that you have a perfectly good financial history before and after that, and that you'll be happy to talk to them about it in any way, shape, or form. So bottom line is you want to be honest about it.
Doug, do you have others?
Okay, sorry. All right, we have another question here. How quickly do you determine how to hire a person or not? And that's for Jeff or Diane?
Could you repeat the question, please?
I believe this might be for Diane here. Again, I'm sorry, Jeff. How quickly do you determine how to hire a person or not?
On the federal government side, it can take anywhere from 3 weeks to a year and a half, and it varies dramatically. I wish I had a better answer for you.
And it's not much different in the private sector. Usually you can put your front runners together in a short period of time, but remember, sometimes you have to go for second, third, fourth, and in many situations more, or group interviews, which are spread out over a long period of time, especially right now with so many candidates available. They're trying to find the best person for a job. So unfortunately, the downside is it does take quite some time.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we have another question here. And Diane, this will be for you, probably. If you're applying for a federal job and it asks for a written KSA statement for the application, do you need to follow the CCAR format for the written statement?
Yes, you do. If you have a KSA statement that needs to be addressed as an essay in a federal application, you want to use that CCAR format. I would also say that many applications now are asking you to integrate the KSA, the knowledge, skill, and ability, into the body of the resume. And in that case, it will be a very short story, but you still want to try to get it into that CCAR format. The difference would be you could drop the context, because the context will be your job description and your job title in the top part of the resume. So really what you're doing then is just giving a mini bullet about what that story is and what the result of it is. But if you follow that CCAR format in the development of any federal resumes or KSAs or executive core qualification statements or any other narrative statements they ask you to create, you will be doing very well.
Okay. And we had one last question here. About, on average, how many people will apply for any given federal job? It looks like more along the lines of a mid-range career level.
Oh, wow. I had a client just apply for a position 2 weeks ago. He qualified for the job, but not highly qualified. And the reason was there were more than 1,600 veterans in the pool, and that didn't include all of the veterans in the pool. So in some cases, there can be well over 2,000 to 3,000 people applying for one position. So that's why your resume has to be really strong, written very well, and follow all of the self-assessment questions and requirements on the announcement.
And also, we work very closely with the Drug Enforcement Administration, the FBI, many security agencies who have been on a hiring freeze, and that freeze is being lifted in the next few weeks, where you'll see an onslaught of candidates looking to take the exams and try to start that process going forward. So it'll be numbered in the thousands.
Wow.
Well,
Doug, are there any
looks
others
like
sitting
that
out there?
Those are all that I saw.
Okay.
I do see one here. I think Jeff could probably answer this one. I've often heard an interviewer will determine within 30 seconds whether or not to hire a person. Does this still apply?
There's no question it still applies. In the private sector, it's that response that I try to hire someone that resembles myself. And so if there's any connections that I make with a candidate, same college, same neighborhood, same high school, same background, same past employers, it resonates that the candidate might be someone that I'm interested in. So you do have that quick first impression, how a person walks in the room, how a person greets you, whether the handshake is limp and sweaty. All of these pieces are put together at the end of the interview, whether it's 15 minutes, half hour, or longer, and we start to score. So that first piece when you walk in the door is when that interview starts. You don't have to open your mouth, but the interview has already started. How you deal with the receptionist when you're in the waiting room. How fidgety are you? There are a lot of pieces that get put into moving you to the second stage of an interview.
Okay, great. Thank you. We actually got another one here. What's the best way to handle the compensation talk? Should I first, or let them throw out the number first? And any specific for doing so in this economy?
Well, this is Diane. I'll respond to that initially. One of the things that I did at Northrop Corporation was very specifically determine and negotiate the salaries as the middleman between the accounting department and the client. So it's a little bit difficult. If you're working with a recruiter, you're going to have to give them a number because they're going to work that number with the company that they're going to present you before. If you're working with the company directly, you want to ask them, what is the range that you have for this position? And see if you can get them to give you a number first. In this economy, you need to find out what the comparable salary is. Look at salary.com. You can Google different sites like that and see if you can figure out what the salaries are and figure out what the ranges are. A quick story, I worked with a client not too long ago who was very scared about the salary component. We practiced and practiced. He never said a word. They asked him, what do you want? He said, what's your range? They told him. He said, that'll work for me, and he got an offer a few days later at the very top of the range. Now, you have to practice that. You have to learn the culture of the company and how they negotiate a little bit, but that gives you a little bit of tidbit there, and I'm sure Jeff has other comments on that.
Well, in the private sector, it's pretty a little bit more flexible. And what I say is if you meet the job specs at 100%, you're a little bit more in command of what that salary that will be offered is going to be. So you have to look at what the job specs are and how you compare your background to the job specifications. So if you meet it at 80%, 90%, you need to be able to be a little bit flexible that if you don't get the top of the range, that you're still going to be in the running. But if you're asking for maximum and there are people out there that have better credentials, you're probably not going to get the job.
Doug, anything else?
It does not look like it. I think that was it.
Okay. Hey, Jeff, could you mute for a second, please?
I'm sorry?
Can you mute? I'm getting feedback.
Oh, sure.
Oh, there you go. So thank you, sir. All right, speakers, thank you very much. This was a great presentation. I think the questions were good. I think they were answered solidly. From DVNF also to the attendees, we wish all of you the very best of luck in your job search and subsequent interviewing steps. I really hope this was helpful. Keep your eyes peeled for an invitation for the next webinar. It is scheduled to be mid to late June. And that's a wrap, everyone. Right on time, 2:58. Have a great day. Good luck.